The US just unveiled its largest job revision since 2009. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Ainslie Insights, brought to you by Ainslie Bullion, Ainslie Crypto, and the Gold and Silver Standard as the Ainslie Group celebrates 50 years. Today, welcome back Branko, who's been looking into the reasons behind an extremely large data revision and trying to make sense of it all. How are you going today, Branko?
Good, good. Yeah, very interesting topic because this is something that obviously we talk about a lot, but the mainstream media doesn't really mention. And then this morning it was kind of all over mainstream news. So keen to get into it.
Well, we've been joking about this, but you and I for quite a number of months now that you can't trust the data, what's going on, because they'll put a number out and then massively revise it sort of the next month. But this was ridiculous, like 818,000 job revision. That's massive. So can you talk us through what's going on there? And particularly, we're comparing it to 2009, why that comparison is relevant.
Yeah, so I put up a quick chart just kind of comparing it, and it is quite significant. And also, remember, this is raw jobs as well. So you got to think that in 2009, less population in the US. So it's probably comparatively actually more now. But it's the biggest downward revision since 2009, and this goes back to March this year. And I guess the significance of this is pretty crazy just because, again, it's something we've all been talking about for a while, but even today, the mainstream media had to mention it, like CNN, Reuters, they all talked about it because it was so large. Like to have the second largest yearly revision since 2009 in an election year, which again is something I kind of want to keep harping on because this blatant manipulation, in my opinion, kind of has to be motivated. It just seems too much. It's too significant to not be motivated. So, yeah, it was all over the news this morning. I think it's just credence to a lot, like gives credence to a lot of skeptics that were saying these numbers are bullshit when, clearly they are. And I guess a bit more just information was that instead of around 242,000 jobs being added every month from April 2023 to March 24, the real number is 173,000 created, which is quite a large, it's over 70,000. That's off the top of my head, that'd be 35%-ish, 35, 40%. So that's quite a significant change. And again, this is a consistent, it's not like they messed up 1 month. This has been consistent, like little revisions, often quite big revisions, but every month for that time period. So yeah, it is quite significant.
And it's my problem with it is it's always in one direction. If it was a mistake, or not necessarily even a mistake, but statistical anomalies that occur along the way, you would expect it to be both direction, like up and down, but it's always the one direction. Does this ultimately, I mean, you've mentioned it effectively already, the reliability of that data, does it undermine the credibility of the Bureau of Labor Statistics here, particularly? But further than that, the reliability of that data, we rely on that data. If you're a policymaker, if you're, work in the financial markets like we are, people are sort of counting on the data being accurate to make informed decisions. What does it do to the underlying reliability, credibility, just the fact that we need that data? What happens there?
On the first point, because it was so prevalent in the mainstream media this morning, I think it's going to lower the credibility of these institutions in many people's eyes that were previously not kind of awake to it. Like I said, CNN, Reuters, so many different previously outlets that wouldn't talk about it were discussing it. So I think it's going to change a lot of people's minds. Now, people that always knew it, this is kind of not really new information, but for new people, I think it's significant. And I'd also add, the reason we harp on this is that this is the stuff, like you said, that controls like monetary policy, not just in the US, but almost globally.
Yes.
And the fact that the government can so blatantly alter the data means that in a way they're kind of altering how a lot of the economic policy that they shouldn't have control over, right? They're kind of altering that as well. And that's why it's just so frustrating and such an important discussion because, they can effectively manipulate it for their own interests. Like, like I say, in the election year, like they're doing now, they're trying to make the economy, when it comes out, it seems, oh, look, all these jobs created. And the mainstream media does report on that, right? When there's like a massive, they'll be like, oh, look, massive jobs increase. And then they don't report on, oh, down revisions, it's 40% less. So yes, I think it has significantly, given how, again, how the mainstream media is reporting it, changed a lot of people's opinions. And then the reason they say significant is because it does control economic policy.
So you mentioned in the article a specific part of this being attributed to the birth death model. Now, I know that's one that you find a little bit, or you have some issues with, it can be considered a little bit controversial. Can you talk us through that angle? Because a lot of weight has been given to that model in describing why there's such a large discrepancy.
Yeah, there's honestly quite a lot of these models we've discussed previously. That is one where they try to account for like new business formations and closures, and it's so easy to manipulate these numbers when you have a lot of implied assumptions in like birth rates and death rates, and that's kind of the key point there. And then another thing they do is like they'll overestimate startups and underestimate firms shutting down, and they kind of blame that on COVID and business dynamics as a result of COVID. So there's a lot of different implied assumptions in the data, similar to inflation, but probably more blatant, where they can really alter it. And another thing is a lot of these numbers are like, so for example, they'll get a very small pool, because obviously they'll get maybe a very small pool of data and they massively extrapolate that to ridiculous proportions.
Yes, yeah. So it's not a broad survey.
Yeah, so it's not really a broad survey. They might get small amount of responses and then kind of extrapolate that, and then within that extrapolation, they'll say, "Oh well." I'm trying to make some recent good examples here, but there's quite a lot. But it would be like, if someone had two jobs, I think it's like if someone had two jobs, they might put that down as like someone else that didn't have a job that did have a job. Does that make sense?
Yeah,
so
yeah.
you're kind of getting rid of one unemployed person. So things like that are kind of implicit in the data that they can just purely manipulate it.
So we've also had some economists, and you mentioned this in the article, Torsten Slock, for example, you mentioned specifically, arguing that these revisions aren't really significant actually overall. Do you think that? Do you think that they don't really matter? That there's not really any implications for the Federal Reserve's upcoming decision, for example, because they're looking at other things? I mean, I don't necessarily agree with that. I think they are looking very closely at unemployment, but what's your take on that sort of angle where people just say it simply doesn't matter?
Yeah, so I'll give a quick quote on what Torsten is the chief economist at Apollo Global Management, what he said. And he said that telling me that over 12 months ago it wasn't 160 million, it was only 159.2 because it was downgraded 800,000, isn't making much of a difference to how the Fed and financial markets are thinking about the economy. And in theory, you're like, oh, that kind of makes sense. That's a small difference. But comparing it to all the jobs available in the world isn't exactly a great comparison. You should be comparing it to the jobs in the past year or month, or the change, not the overall amount. So I think it's an unfair thing to say. And I think the equity markets, kind of responded a little bit. S&P and NASDAQ are up about 0.5%. So, and obviously, as we've stated before, the Fed and monetary policy this is a contributing factor to what it is based on. So stock markets generally and the Fed disagree with this economist. And even though in theory it sounds good, like, oh, it's just a small difference, but he's kind of comparing it to the macro, all the jobs in the world. And really that's just a crazy thing to compare it to. And I think given that, again, that the media was talking about it a lot today, maybe the perception is changing on that.
And I think the last question, just to wrap this up, you've hinted at this, you've sort of said it directly at different times as well. This concept of we're in an election year, we're getting increasingly close to the pointy end of that decision making in the US. The incentive is there for the data to be manipulated to support the person who's already in power to maintain that power. I mean, we would love to think that that's not the case, but it seems like when you see massive discrepancies like that can't really be explained away through anything other than some form of manipulation, it's a bit concerning. What's your, sort of to wrap it up, what's your take on that angle? Is this, I mean, no one's going to know for sure, but in your view, is this political manipulation?
Yeah, I think it is. And also I would say that, again, it's bipartisan. Whoever's in power is going to do it. When Trump was in power, the stock market at record levels, blah, blah, blah. And then Biden was in power, he's doing the same thing, stock market at record levels. For example, like whenever, like the S&P theoretically every 4 years should be at a record level because it just, goes up generally like 8% a year. So, but the president wants to come out and say, look at me, I'm the best president ever, it's at record level. So this isn't just, just for the jobs report. It's actually kind of all over their messaging, but specifically with the jobs report, because, I mean, it's been an intense focus on global economic factors, given the crazy interest rates we've had recently and the changes there. I think their government has been more inclined to potentially manipulate that situation. So again, given that it's almost like every month it's revised down, that's not a coincidence, right? There's something wrong in the data that they could fix if they wanted to. Because think about it, if you're an analyst, right, and you do, say, every month, 10 out of the past 12, which I think is the amount, but fact check me on it, 10 out of the 12 past months, all your numbers been revised down. Eventually, you're going to be like, wait a minute, like maybe I should adjust my model. Like, imagine
100%. Yeah.
Like, it just doesn't make sense. You know what I mean? Because like you're going to want to fix it, but maybe there's some directive, or maybe there's no necessary motive to adjust it, which is what I think is happening. So that's why I keep getting these wrong answers. And I think the only explanation is that it is politically motivated, or, I mean, you could say extreme incompetence, but I mean, that would almost be too incompetent to get it wrong in 80% of the time.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, we don't have any answers here, but it's at some point it just becomes a joke, and I think we're at that point now where it is a joke when the numbers are that large, consistently wrong in one direction. Yeah. You go, okay, well, whatever. Why do we even tune in to listen to those numbers if they're going to be that wrong? But that's where we are. So as always, appreciate your work in sort of getting to the bottom of that and sort of analysing it. We'll keep watching as it goes on and see if we can make any more sense out of what happens in the months ahead. But hopefully no more ridiculous revisions of that scale in the next few months. We'll see where we go.
Sounds good.
Thanks for your work on that, Brenko.
Yeah.
Thanks everyone for watching. We'll chat again soon.